and then turning on the megaphone option.
Excellent.
Will be great. I can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect. All right. This is pretty fancy stuff here.
Thank you.
All right. Now I've got to figure out how I can turn around so I'm not facing myself. Or I guess
your arrows, Brian. Just click. So, yeah.
There we go. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Jamil. Thank you so much for having me here. This is really a kind of a special opportunity to speak to you all. And I know you've got, Jamil, you were saying you've got some folks here who have served, and some Ukrainians, and other folks that are called to this very important effort.
That's right.
I think it's. I have often wondered, what would it have been like to live during the run-up to World War II, where you saw what was very clear injustice happening, and the serenity of countries being sacrificed, and basically on the world stage. And how could the world have sit so idly by for so long? And I feel with what we're seeing in Ukraine, we can see how that happened. I mean, what's happening in Ukraine is so galling at so many different levels. It's so brazen. It's so shocking. And I think that you've got, it's such an atrocity. There's such literal war crimes being committed. And I think, it speaks very highly of everyone here, that people really are trying to find how can I help? How can I get beyond just kind of doom scrolling and being horrified, and how can I be driven to action? What are the things that I can go do? And that's I've always felt that we've got a bunch of veterans who work at Oxide, and I think that part of the reason that they're drawn to work with us, and I'm drawn to work with them, is because of this call to something larger than themselves, and to do something that isn't merely self-serving or self-advancing, and to actually serve others. And I think that's. Yeah, right. Doom scrolling. I feel like I'm doing a lot of doom scrolling. Then we get doing doom scrolling for like the last 5 years between so much. But I think that the kind of the magnitude of horror that we're seeing is really something we have not seen. And I just am so impressed with all of you who are taking the time to work together, do something positive, create something to help the struggle for freedom and serenity and democracy in Ukraine, which is a country that is now going through unspeakable horrors. I think it's also important that this will end. I believe. I think that Ukraine can't be conquered, I believe, and I believe that Ukraine will triumph with respect to its serenity. But I think that there's going to be an extremely long process of rebuilding Ukraine. So I think that all of us need to focus on Ukraine long after it's probably drifted from the headlines, hopefully drifted from the headlines, because it's so important. That it's important for all of us that Ukraine is able to win in this very important fight for its freedom and serenity. So, Jamil, I'm not sure how long you got me on the stage here. I don't want to take up any of too much of your very valuable time. I'm just again so impressed with all of you for taking on this very, very important struggle, and for finding ways that you can help. Because I think, again, that's the challenge that we have is it's very easy to kind of feel upset about the challenges in the world. And it's much more difficult to find the ways that you can be the constructive difference that you want to be, serve a cause larger than yourself. That is the actual challenge. And I really admire the fact that all of you are here doing that now. And, hopefully you have get some excitement working together. I love hackathons because they're so, you get to leave everything else at the door and really focus on being creative and productive and forward looking, and to serve this terrific cause on top of it is just really, really admirable. So thank you so much,
Bryan.
Yeah. And
yeah, thank you so much. I believe our judge, Vlad, who is from Kiev in Ukraine, I believe he has one or two questions.
Yeah.
And while he's getting that ready, people can also use the chat here. We'll use the next 30 seconds to use the chat to see if anyone else has any questions here. Yeah, Vlad, are you set with your questions?
Yeah, I guess I could kind of have an existential question. So we're like software engineers, and we're making programs, and we're going to run them in production, and they get stuck. We get stack traces, we fix them, we restart, and now we're suddenly it's all, our skills are kind of diminished in value. We need to build operating systems for weapons or something. How do we kind of keep? What is a good way to keep resolve? In finding what needs to be done today. Because as a software guy, it's hard to refocus.
Yeah, in terms of what needs to be done, and if I just understand the question, in terms of what do we need to do to make robust software?
Yeah, and today.
Yeah, well, I think that, there was, it's very easy to kind of despair about the state of software. And maybe, DJ, I can kind of answer your question. And I probably should have given you a little bit of an intro about kind of who I am or my perspective. So, I've been a software engineer for my entire career for 25 plus years. And as Vlad is kind of alluding to, much of my career has been spent trying to understand why software is misbehaving and why software is operating across purposes. I developed a facility called Dtrace that allows us to dynamically instrument production systems and allowed us to put a really strong spotlight on software systems and discovered a bunch of things that were doing the wrong thing or doing surprising things. Since then, I'm the CTO of a computer company, Oxide Computer Company, where we are developing a new rack scale machine and very much focused on that robust foundation. And I guess it was a way of answering your question. I do think that there are some exciting developments that are leading to a more robust foundation. It's no secret that I'm very bullish on Rust. I think that Rust is an extremely important development. It is the most important development in computing systems since the development of C. It's that much of a leap forward. And I think just looking at our systems that we have developed in Rust, we are able to make much more robust artifacts. Rust is not the only example. I mean, I think Zig is really interesting. There are a bunch of interesting programming languages. And I would like to believe that we are getting past this era of blathering out infrastructure software, for lack of a better word, where we were building this kind of towering stack. And everyone is not really understanding the abstractions beneath them and just building the tower higher and higher and higher. And I think we are now in a mode where we are revisiting a bunch of that and making the stack, I think, much leaner, much more robust. So I think there's a lot of reason for optimism. And another good question in terms of tips for leading big software teams. This is something that you might all appreciate, or the folks here will appreciate. I actually think that the single most important thing you can do in leading a team is to be very clear about what you want the values of that team to be. And certainly at Oxide, we have been, if you're at all familiar with the company, you know that we have been very emphatic about the values that we have as a company. And we differentiate between values and principles. Principles are those things that are universal. And indeed, I think many of us would argue that serenity, freedom, these are universal principles. That's part of what you're here to work on in this hackathon, but you're here kind of defending those principles. So our principles, we have a small group of principles that we expect for everyone to abide by, and then a larger set of values that are in tension, that are not binary. And I think leading any team, but especially a software team, it's very important to be explicit about what those values are, because they allow people to make decisions on their own. You can trust people to make decisions when you've been very clear about what those values are. And that's a little abstract, but we have found that to be essential. And there's a presentation that I'm sure Jamal can link to, or I can drop a link to, that I gave on Amazon has these 14 leadership principles that kind of troll me. And so I have a talk about maybe some of the things that I like about those, but then a lot of things I don't like about those, and why it is actually important to have very clear principles and values in an organization. But that's the single most important thing I would recommend doing.
I had a question to go off on the tangent with that. So you're doing like an operating system software in Rust now, but like 10 years ago you were doing system software in JavaScript. Could you reflect like on that and how like your values changed like in those past 10 years?
Yeah,
I guess for context, like you had a Unix operating system software with a lot of tooling written in JavaScript, like in Node, because your company owned Node and basically you're pioneers like doing this, right? And then you move back to like safer languages and more down to hardware level stuff.
Yeah, no, this is very true. And I would say that it is my experience failing in that really catalyzed my own views on the importance of values, because I assumed that everyone shared my values. And I was excited about Node for system software because there were things about JavaScript that I thought were really interesting and powerful. And what I learned is that actually the values that I have aren't necessarily the same values that others have for all levels of the software stack. And in particular, I assumed that because Node was effectively server-side JavaScript, that it would become much more rigorous over time. And it really didn't, actually. It ultimately did, but we call that TypeScript, right? TypeScript is very much, kudos to Microsoft for TypeScript, very important development. But I think that whole experience, again, it's a very good question, because that whole experience didn't go well. It also highlighted for me that a very large community of software developers can be detrimental, that you can have people think like, if I've got a large community, this is great. There's a huge community of people. It's like, well, maybe, but not if that community doesn't agree. And the JavaScript community was all over the map. And in particular, the values that we had as a company around rigor, robustness, debuggability, observability, to a lesser degree, performance, security, were not really shared. And that led to a divorce. And I was asked to give a talk at Node Summit in 2017, long after this kind of divorce had taken place. And we were had a bit of an existential crisis in terms of figuring out what it was going to be. What were we going to program in, if not Node and not C? And, I was asked to give this keynote, and I'm like, no way, I'm not going to give a keynote. I've got nothing nice to say. And the organizer of the conference is like, oh, no, we definitely want you to give a keynote if you have nothing nice to say. It's like, oh, brother. So it actually was very helpful because it forced me to kind of think about what happened and process what happened and try to say it in a way that was, not impolite, but also direct and candid and forthright. And so that is this, the software, so software platform is a reflection of values, is I think what I called it. Again, kind of the same theme of being explicit about who you are and what's important to you is a really important way of finding others that agree with you, that share your values, finding software platforms that share your values, finding organizations that share your values. So I know I may sound like a bit like a broken record, but it's only because I've learned this the very, very hard way. Don't assume that other people share your values necessarily. And that's not wrong. I mean, you should assume that people share your principles. You should assume that people are going to be honest and they're going to have integrity. You should, I think, default to, we have to default to trusting one another at some level. But you should not assume that people share your values, and you should not assume they're going to make the same decisions that you make. And you should find people and platforms and software technologies and so on that explicitly share those values. So, Vlad, I'm not sure how much of that, how good an answer that is, but at least it's an honest one.
Well, I started thinking that, like, in Rust, you could, like, kind of implicitly force people into getting an idea of what your values are by specifying by restricting the type of programs that people can write. Is that something that you do with the language? Like,
well, yeah, I mean, I do think that there is, I know that's a good point. And I think that, like, I mean, Rust does force you to, like, there's only, the Rust compiler is going to force a certain level of adherence to Rust values. And things around safety and so on, Rust has got very strong feelings about. And yeah, I think you can enforce that with a system and a language. And then you allow people to opt in to those values. And I think it leads to a much stronger community.
There's something that you could limit, like, inside.
What's that?
What about, like, inside the team? Like, is there something you could say, use some construct in the language to kind of, maybe narrow down, like, what the features that Rust has to what your values are within the team?
Well, so I'll tell you what, the something that I think is just I can't go back from, I can't not have anymore, is the idea of sum types, of algebraic types for error handling. So an algebraic type, the sum type, is like you can think of it as like a union in C or C++, if you know those languages, or certainly like an enum in Rust. But it's a type that can be this type or that type or this other type. It can be one of these number of types. And the reason that's so powerful is because it allows functions to pass back when you combine that with generic types, I can actually pass back a result that is either an OK type that is parameterized by a type T, or it's an error type that's parameterized by another type E. So what you have is an error or it's OK. And that means that is a really powerful idea, because it forces everybody that consumes that function has to be able to handle the error. You can't, it becomes much harder. You can't just ignore it. You have to do something with it. You can't get to that result without actually unwrapping it. So that to me has been as a concrete example of something that I am that I won't go back from, that I really, really, really like, and leads to a much more robust software.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then, these are good questions about, like,
coming in.
Yeah. So starting a Marine coders program, I think is a great idea. I think actually you should really, one of my colleagues who's a veteran, a Marine himself, served in Afghanistan and is now at Oxide Red Cross. I think who often, he lives between these worlds of software engineering, but understanding the Marine Corps. I think it's really helpful to have folks like that who really understand all of the terrific value and values that folks have observed, and then understanding like how to kind of map that on to the software ecosystem. So I really think it's helpful to have folks that really understand both of these worlds. And then the other thing that I would I always encourage everyone is that software seems inscrutable because we design these layers of abstraction to function. And we want to make sure that you can like boot a computer without having to understand an operating system, or run an operating system without having to understand a microprocessor, or run a microprocessor without having to understand the firmware. Like we want to have these layers of abstraction be pretty sealed, but they can be really intimidating as a result. And I think just encouraging people, especially if you've got folks who are new to software, you really need to get over that intimidation factor and know that, hey, this is all knowable. You can learn about all this stuff. It's either documented or you've got source code, and you can actually understand how all this stuff works, which to me is very empowering. It's very empowering to know that these systems are all synthetic. There's nothing, these are not biological systems. We're not doing science here. We are actually understanding human-built artifacts. And to me, it's exciting that we can learn how all of this stuff works. But it definitely takes a lot of work to do that, but it's all doable. And I think that, you can appeal to that terrific work ethic and drive that you see in the service to encourage people to understand the way these information systems work. On modern software solutions within the government, I think I think there are lots of people that, I would say don't shy away from complexity. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that these systems are complicated, and you can understand them. I think in terms of how to modernize these software systems, I think you got to come in with some reverence for them. It's very easy to deride these systems, like these horrifically legacy systems. There's a reason they're legacy systems. They're legacy systems because these were some of the first things that we automated. When we invented the computer, one of the very first things we did were things like the census, taxes, flight scheduling, radar. These are some of the earliest uses of computers, because it's impossible to effectively do these things by hand. So you have to understand these systems have been around for a long time because they're important. But that said, they often do need to be modernized. And how can you modernize them without discarding the elements of the problem that they solve that are important? So, to give you a really concrete example of this, I worked with, when I was at Sun for 14 years, Sun Microsystems, a computer company. And one of our customers was Lockheed, which was the old IBM Federal Systems division. And they were developing air traffic control, an air traffic control system. And somewhat infamously, when they went to modernize, there were many failed attempts to modernize the air traffic control system, in part because they weren't really listening to controllers. And one of the things that controllers, it's very important to air traffic controllers, is the ability to have a physical artifact that denotes the state of a plane. And when they hand off an aircraft, they wanted to physically hand off this artifact. Why is that? Because they wanted to have a system in case they lost power, in case they lost their computing systems. And right, exactly. And I do think that you can't say, well, it's like, oh, well, that's antiquarian. And forget that. Like, we've got this way of automating that. And it's like, well, hold on. What is that controller telling you? What they're telling you is that, for me, the safety of the system is extremely important to me. The robustness of the system is extremely important to me. And are there ways to square it? And they ultimately, when they succeeded, when they found a way of having these physical artifacts that themselves reflected the automation, and the physical artifact they kind of would have these tokens effectively that would denote aircraft, and they were able to kind of square it by satisfying the controllers while also being much more modern. And I think that that's what we have to, in a lot of these government systems, but large systems. You see the same thing in healthcare. My father's a physician and has seen any number of people attempt to improve the healthcare system with better automation. And then people complain that like, oh my God, like, they're so antiquated in the healthcare system. And it's like, well, yes and no, because if you have a technology that affects patient outcomes, the embrace of that technology is very swift. Ultrasound, NMR, CT, these things were embraced very quickly, actually. So it's more complicated than that. And I think that, James, just what you're saying, I think you've got to find a way to listen, but then also lead into the future. And you have to know, like, are you wanting to do it this way because that's always the way you've done it and you can't envision a better way of doing it? Or is there some wisdom in this that I need to listen to? And can I show you that I'm listening to the wisdom that you have about the system and show you a better way to do it? And that has to be said, like, that's hard. That's super, super hard to do. And it can be also frustrating because these are slow moving systems and everything else. But I'm not sure if that's helpful or not. But so mid-level backend developer looking to get a job working in Rust. I think the number one most important thing is to learn Rust and start playing around with it and get involved in an open source community that reflects something that you like. You're here, you're at a hackathon. You are all taking time, maybe time away from your job, or you are choosing to be here because you enjoy this. And you should find some domain that you enjoy and contribute to it. And find other people that kind of share your values. In terms of learning Rust, so one thing I would say, and this used to be true way back in the day. So way back in the day, because I'm a fossil and I predate the internet, if you are of my vintage, the way you learned a programming language is, well, you read an article in Enter magazine or Byte magazine, and then you bought a book on it and you read the book, and you couldn't download the compiler. You had to buy the compiler. And then with the internet, obviously that all changed. And we ended up with these languages where people just try to kind of Google their way into mastery. They kind of search the internet into mastery. And with a language like Go or Python, you can get away with that. And if GitHub Copilot is effective in this language, you can get away with it. Rust, that's not going to work as well. In Rust, you really want to sit down and learn it from first principles. And I recommend there's a book, Programming Rust, an O'Reilly book that I would recommend. But part of what I like about that book, and I should also, the Rust programming language is also a great book. It's the author works at Oxide, Steve Klavnik, so I should plug his book too. But the reason I like the Programming Rust book is it actually starts with a program that you sit and enter, which feels very old school to me, where you're like looking at this program listing in a book and kind of entering it in and trying to run it. And then when it fails, trying to figure out why it failed. To me, that was a very good way of learning Rust. And then kind of proceeding through this narrative, walking you through the things that Rust has done, I think was a great way to learn Rust. And I'd recommend that. But I think you do want to sit down and learn it from a book. In terms of getting involved in open source projects, I think it's like, what are the things that you like to use? What are the things that are whether they're fun or interesting or what have you? As you're using things, look at the repo behind it, and what are the open issues? What are the things how can you get involved? The great thing about open source is it's all there. It's all out there. The discussions are all out there. The people are out there. Often hanging out in, a Discord or a Slack or what have you, where you can, learn, how you can contribute. But you're going to do it first by using something, finding something that's exciting to you, using it, and then getting involved. Hope I got every question there, or most of them.
There seems to be a couple more here in the chat.
Let's see here.
By Leah.
Oh yeah, that was in terms of that's how I recommend getting involved in open source projects, is by using them and checking out the GitHub or the GitLab or wherever the discussion is happening, hopping into wherever the discussion is happening, and mess around, play around, try to extend things, try to do interesting things, try to do some things that are exciting to you personally and see where it goes.
Awesome, Bryan. I think those are all the questions here. I appreciate your time. And yeah, thanks again. I appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you so much for having me. And again, really, I think so highly of all of you and the time you're spending on this. This is very, very important, and good on you for taking positive action and helping out on this very, very important struggle in Ukraine.
Awesome. And when can we expect your next Troop One Scout video to come out?
Yeah, right. Yeah, so what you're also making reference to is the fact that I'm also the Scoutmaster for the kids Scout troop. We were under COVID. I was doing my Scoutmaster minutes online. Yeah, those have all been in person now, or we're back to meeting in person. I had no idea that people are. I'm amazed that you found those. Although actually, a couple of my coworkers are saying like, "Hey, actually, I kind of like those. Like, keep bringing those out." So yeah, maybe I should go them. I do actually pride myself on, I've got pretty good Scoutmaster minutes with the Scouts. I do. It is the thing that I actually like the most about. I really enjoy. My kids are all in Scouts, but I enjoy being with adolescents as they themselves are trying to figure out what they're about. So it's fun. Other people's teenagers are great. Your own teenagers are, of course, are hell on earth. But other people's teenagers are really, really impressive. And actually, a great question about getting the Scouts involved in hackathons. I'll tell you, we had the Scouts I was suggesting, they're trying to figure out, a meeting idea. I'm like, if you wanted to, we could have the Scouts by Oxide. And so I had no idea how many of these kids are going to show up? But we had an absolutely packed house. It was a lot of fun, and I think it showed how that there's a really grassroots level of enthusiasm for technology and for understanding how this stuff works, which is really, really neat. So yeah, it's been fun.
Awesome, Bryan. It's been a towering sense of honor, and we'll keep in touch online.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Good luck on the hackathon, everybody.
Ooh, thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Yeah, Bryan can just close out the browser tab here. Cool. Yeah, that was an awesome talk there. Hope that was imprinted in people's minds and people's machines.